Welcome back to the kitchen house. It's been about 3 weeks since we planted these seeds, the Cherokee purple tomatoes, and you can see we've got quite a bit of progress. I had almost 100% germination in these pots. At least every pot has at least one popping up in it. Since I planted more than one tomato seed in each pot, there's several that have 3 or 4 or maybe 5. I've thinned out a couple of them already, but what my goal is I want to wind up with one plant per pot, because this is not a lot of space for a plant to grow more than a couple inches, and I don't want these to start crowding out each other or competing for the nutrients that are in this soil. So I'm just going to pull out 2 that I don't think are quite as good, or maybe not in the middle of the pot. So this is what I want to wind up with at the end of the day, at about this stage. So now that I have these pots growing, I want to talk a little bit about, or these seedlings growing, I want to talk a little bit about soil, because these are only going to be in these pots for another week or so, and I need to start thinking about what am I going to put them into. And I think about, we're basically building a tomato, and building a tomato is kind of like making a cake in the kitchen. The idea of, if you're gonna make a cake, you need a recipe, a really good one, and then you need ingredients, and really good ingredients. And sometimes it's important to put a lot of emphasis on that recipe, but it's also important to really think about good quality ingredients. And sometimes in gardening, we put such an emphasis on the seeds that we have, and not enough emphasis on the soil. These seeds are basically like the recipe on how to build a tomato. The DNA inside these seeds is going to tell me, first of all, that it's a tomato, and then it's going to decide how big this tomato plant is going to grow, if it's going to be a really long trailing vine or more bushy, if it's going to have yellow tomatoes or red tomatoes, if those tomatoes are going to be slightly on the sweet side or slightly on the tart side. All of that information is in this recipe, or the DNA of this tomato seed. But I'm not building a tomato out of this. This is not the substance of that tomato. I'm going to depend on the ingredients that are going into building a tomato for its substance, and that's basically soil. So this is really important. There's a lot of people who will say they tend to put a $4 plant in a $1 hole, and really should be putting a $1 plant into a $4 hole. This is really where your value lies. This is going to build me a tomato. And when I'm thinking about how do I judge this, how do I decide if this is going to give me the tomato that I want, there's a lot of people who are getting their doctorate in soil science, and I'm not going to go into that, and it's way over my head. But the 3 basic things that I judge the quality of soil are on, number 1, its structure, just the physicality of what does this look and feel like. Nothing to do with its fertility, but just the structure of the soil. The second is going to be the chemistry, or what elements are in that soil that are going to give my plants the building blocks that it needs. And number 3 is the biology, or the life that's in that soil that makes those nutrients accessible. Let me talk a little bit deeper about those. So the structure, I really want a physicality of soil that is not too sandy or too much clay, which fortunately in Florida we lean pretty far away from clay. We have a very sandy soil, and that by itself is probably not going to be the kind of structure that we want, because what I really want is soil that can absorb water quickly. So when it rains, I don't want that to just run off. I want it to be able to absorb quickly, but then hang on to it and kind of distribute that water to the plant slowly. So it absorbs quickly and distributes slowly. That's going to give me that right balance of giving the plant what it wants, but also giving the microbiome what it wants. Because if I have soil that's waterlogged, all of those microbes that are living in the soil, they need to have oxygen as well as moisture. So keeping that balance of water and oxygen has a lot to do with the structure, because as that water is seeping down into the soil, it's pulling in oxygen behind it, and that's important to give that microbiome what it needs to live. The second thing, and probably what we emphasize most in soil, is the chemistry of the soil, the idea of like the elements that are necessary, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, all of those things that are the building blocks. And we are a lot of fertilizer companies will sell those as ready to take for your plants, and they will work. You're going to get a formulation of those elements that are able to be quickly pulled up by the plants and have a plant be really healthy. What people don't realize, I think, enough is that there's plenty of good chemistry in typical soil. There's plenty of elements that are there, but they're just not accessible. It's almost like having a pantry full of peanut butter jars that you can't open. Do you really have peanut butter at that point if you don't have access to that? And so what makes those minerals and elements accessible to plants to grow is actually the biology in the soil. That's that living ecosystem. The third thing that I want to talk about is this biology that's literally able to dissolve those elements into ways that plants can then have access to them. So again, the structure of the soil is like this place where the plant's going to hang on to the earth, and there's also going to be this ecosystem that lives there. You need a structure that suits that well. Then you need the chemistry, which we're probably going to have if we have a soil that's got lots of organic matter put back into it. A lot of those elements that we're looking for are going to be there. But we need the biology to make them accessible. And so that living soil is what we're looking for. So this is our compost, and I feel pretty confident that, first of all, I can tell by just this structure that I can clump it together, and it definitely holds a little bit of moisture. It's not going to be too soppy like mud. It has an ability to drain that away slowly, but this is exactly the structure that I'm looking for. It's definitely going to have the elements, also the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, because those are not as rare as some chemical companies would have you believe they are in our soils. The other thing that I want to make sure and really emphasize is keeping this alive with microbes. And I'm not going to be putting a lot of synthetics into my soil that would be damaging to that ecosystem. So this soil is literally a living community that is going to feed my plants. And if I focus on building soil and growing good, healthy soil, that's what's going to grow my food. So in a couple weeks, when I'm putting these plants into the ground, I'm going to be putting them into a soil that has all three of those elements working for it: the structure, the chemistry, and the biology. That's what I'm really looking for to get a great tomato. And so I'll be planting those in a couple weeks, but probably next week I'm going to be thinking about building a teepee or a structure for them to grow on. So check in with us next week. We'll be posting a video about building a structure for your tomato plants.